sound speeds. And if you're the kind of person that is simply looking for a quick answer so that you can write video starts at timestamp in the comments, then write 8 seconds, because here's your answer. Sound sounds differently at night versus day, and humans respond differently to it. There's your quick answer. Now, if you really want to know why, like the rest of us, stay tuned. And because this is a video that's kind of talking about people's fears of darkness and the sounds that are out there, I figured I would slow this down a little bit, light it a little bit differently, and have more fun with this video, giving you enough time to process as I'm speaking. So let's start at the beginning here. Humans see best during the day. Our eyes are designed for contrast, not the best at picking up color by any means, but contrast, lightness, and darkness we can do quite well, which is why the rods in our eyes, which are designed to pick up the contrast, the brightness, the lightness, and darkness of things, we're able to see off to our peripheral vision and see differences in light levels differently than when you look at it straight on with your eyes, something that you might say, whoa, what is that? You look at it and suddenly the detail falls away because the cones of your eyes, the center part that you're looking at, is designed more for color and picking those up. But let's not get into eyes too much. Just the point I'm making here is that humans see best during the day. We don't have night vision, as you know, and we feel most comfortable when we can see the world around us, like during the day. We can see for miles, in fact, if you're on top of a mountain, or if you're in the middle of a field, you can see if there's anything trying to sneak up on you from a far distance away. But at night, it's different, isn't it? And that's the reason why humans rely heavily on your sense of sight for survival. Now, I'm not poking at people that don't have sight, but in a survival circumstance, someone that does not have a sense of sight is going to have a more difficult time as a rule than someone who does have sight. You're not going to know, for example, that there's berries here unless you go and start feeling around on the ground. And most likely, if you don't have a sense of sight, you're not going to do that. But you can see berries, know perhaps by sight, or perhaps, just visually seeing them, that they are poisonous or not poisonous. You'd have a better chance of that if you have your sense of sight. If there's an animal nearby, you might know that you could kill that and get meat out of it if you're trying to survive. And you might not have that ability as well if you don't have a sense of sight. Now, again, I'm not poking at the people that don't have sight. I'm simply pointing out a few things that should be common sense. Now, you have a disadvantage at night, unless you're familiar with your surroundings or familiar with the people around you. Let me explain that a little bit. Imagine that you're in your front yard and you know that the street is maybe 100 feet away from you. You don't have a whole lot of trees in your driveway. If there is something that's sneaking up on you, you're probably going to see it, be able to run back in your house. You're familiar with your front yard. If you're in your backyard, like my backyard has an 8-foot fence around it, I know that anything that's going to be in that backyard with me after I've been out there for a while, I'm going to know about it. It's most likely going to be someone from my house because you're not going to get into my backyard without me hearing you come through my fence. Or if you come over the back fence, I will hear you coming over this 8-foot fence. Occasionally deer have jumped over, but usually that's over through a lower part. But anyway, those can be spooky creatures sometimes. Let me put it that way. But unless you are familiar with your environment, if you're outside and your ability to see a great distance is impaired, you're probably not going to enjoy it nearly as much. So if you are at night, in the middle of the night at 2 or 3 in the morning, in your yard, you're comfortable with it. You know that if there's someone that comes up from the street, you can run back inside your house, close the door, and you're safe in your house. You're going to feel that way at least. Versus if you were out in the middle of a field alone in the middle of the night, especially if it's a field you're not familiar with. Who knows what's out there? Now, if you are familiar with your surroundings, for example, you're going to be fine with it. But you also have a sense of safety in numbers. So even if it is outdoors in the middle of a field, if you're with a big group camp around a campfire, you're going to be, as a rule, more comfortable with that environment because you're with people that you trust, or at least you're all in the same environment. And in that group, you're more comfortable with the people surrounding you. Chances are you're not going to be out there with people you don't trust in the middle of a field in the middle of the night, right? So, same kind of mentality follows along if you're a single person in your house at night. You're going to hear every little bitty sound. However, even if you have a baby with you, you have someone familiar to hug, hold close, and you're going to feel more comfortable with another person even if you are the adult and you know full and well that if someone were to break in, you're going to sacrifice your own life before that of the child, so that way they have a better chance of escaping. And so it's actually not really safer in a general sense if there is a child with you, because instead of turning and running when presented with a threat, you now are going to be trying to save someone else and sacrificing yourself if you must. False sense of security, you may say. But either way, you're familiar with your environment, you're familiar with a person or people around you. Now, groups as a whole are noisier. And because of that, the smaller sounds in the world are going to be drowned out more. And when you're around the everyday noises that you're familiar with, there is the sense of being more comfortable with. Now, remember, comfort equals familiarity. So if you are, for example, in your house and everybody is moving around, someone's watching TV, you hear someone tapping on their computer, and you hear a child in the other room, playing with toys, and suddenly that child goes quiet, you're going to suddenly be nervous because a child that's quiet could be using crayons on a wall, and that's when you're going to get nervous about it and go check on the child. We usually have a tendency of being more alert to things in a quiet environment or things that are quiet. So as things progress, and during the day, for example, the world sounds differently than it does at night. For example, insects by day may turn into frogs at night. And when that world changes in the way that it sounds at dusk, you're going to be a little bit more aware of your surroundings, not just because you can't see as great of a distance anymore, but because the sounds sound different, and because most humans go inside and are not outside in nature at night. And if you're outside, chances are you're walking perhaps into a nightclub, a grocery store, a gym, someplace that you are familiar with. Yet again, there's that word familiar with, and there's usually people around. If you're going inside of a grocery store, coming out of, chances are there's someone doing the same thing. At the gym, there's going to be people not very far away, security cameras around. It's quite a bit different experience than it would be if you go into a vacant parking lot after hours in a mall. You're going to be more alerted to anybody driving around you or any person that happens to be walking nearby, because there's no longer that safety in numbers thing, and you're in an unfamiliar environment. Now, at night, if you're someplace that you're comfortable with, we understand that now. If you're hiking by day, you're going to be hearing different creatures than you would be at night, because there's paths and the creatures around you are going to know people are going to be walking on those paths during the day, and they're most likely going to be steering clear of humans for the most part. At night, though, people don't normally walk on hiking paths. So creatures will go all over the place at night, whether it's a deer, whether it's an owl, who knows what it's going to be, even if it's an animal that would normally not be fearful of a human, they're probably going to stay relatively still at night if you're walking on one of those trails at night, because they're like, whoa, wait a minute, this is out of the ordinary. This isn't familiar to me. And if you get too close, you might spook them. They might take off, and suddenly you're going to be spooked as well. So things sound differently during the day versus night. Now, creatures at night, going back to that for a second, if you're outside, you're either going to be scared. Those creatures could either be scared of you, or you could be scared of them. And most likely creatures that are outside that are scared of you are going to be wanting to distance themselves from you. And creatures that are most likely going to hunt you are going to most likely stay still and be quiet as well until the very last second when you're doomed. Now, obviously, things like a bear, you're going to hear from a far off distance, but then a bear is not going to necessarily be scared of you. Now, a deer, even though a deer could fully kick your butt if it wanted to, it's a prey. It's going to run away from you and try to avoid conflict because it doesn't want to have to go there. That's just the nature of nature. Now, at night, people are usually indoors and they make less noise. You're not likely going to be washing your car, doing yard work at night, are you? And because if you're outside during the day, your neighbors may be washing their car. They might be, moving stuff out to the street. They might be playing around in the front yard. They might be putting up decorations for a holiday. They could be doing any one of a bunch of different things. It could be walking nearby, jogging. You're hearing all the different sounds that you associate with humans being humans and active during the day. But at night, it's different. At night, people don't move around as much. They're inside. Now, even if you're inside, you could be watching a loud movie at night, but most likely if you have children, you're not going to be blasting it like you would during the day, because at night it's time to settle down, and you might have an animal that's sleeping in your lap and you don't want to just blast them, and keep them on high alert, do you? You don't need to turn things up as much at night unless you really want to, because it's quieter. The world isn't outside making as much noise. It's all trying to settle down for the night. Most people sleep at night. Some people work overnight, and those people are going to be more in an industrial park or some sort of a controlled environment where they're going to be at work inside of a building, most likely. But you are going to be escaping all that inside your house, trying to settle down where it's quiet. Right now, I'm recording in the middle of the night. It's quiet here right now. I can be quiet. You're not going to hear people moving around. They're all sleeping. The air conditioner also in this house is not going to be running full blast all throughout the night. Once it's cooled, it doesn't need to run anymore, and the house is going to maintain its temperature because we have insulation here. So even the air conditioner is going to cut off quite often during the night, which means, taking this to the next step, humans are going to have a heightened sense of awareness at night biologically. There's your survival instinct again. And part of this is also because of just biology, but it's also partially because your threshold for noise is going to go down at night. And when the noise level is here and people are making noise up here, it sounds much less loud than it does when your noise level is here. And the noise levels are the same or even quieter. Your threshold and sensitivity to those sounds goes down and up according to your heightened awareness. Now, because people are less active, the noise level goes up and the signal to noise ratio is higher. So just like when you're recording sound in a quiet room, you're able to hear things. You probably could hear me clicking my mouse here. That's a quiet sound. If this room were noisy and I had my air purifier on, the air conditioner was on, I could click that thing and you're not going to hear it. But because it's quiet in this environment, you're going to be able to hear that noise much easier. And because of that, any little bitty noise throughout the house, you're going to notice as well. So your house is going to be shifting throughout the day, just like it does. It's going to be blowing around in the breeze and the wind. It's going to be shifting, but you're not going to be hearing it because of the world noises of people and humans and air conditioners and everything else that's around you. Just like when you're recording in a quiet environment, you're going to be hearing every little bitty sound versus if you're recording in a conference room full of people that are loud and doing activities. Now, quiet usually puts people on high alert too. Not just because you hear more things, but because you hear things that sound different to you. By day, if it's louder, you're not going to notice your footsteps throughout the house. You're not going to notice your breathing and the air conditioner being, amped up into a higher state. You're not going to be noticing the general world around you nearly as much. But when it is quiet, you're going to notice different things, which is one reason why autonomous sensory meridian response, ASMR, is so popular. Just a sidestep into ASMR. ASMR is the idea and concept of taking usually one or two microphones, a stereo pair to emulate your ears, and you put yourself in a very quiet environment, or gain those things way up so that every little bitty sound is magnified like crazy, and then people do things like crinkle paper and rub their fingers together and stuff. And basically all it's really doing there is triggering your nervous system. Your involuntary nervous system and your voluntary nervous system work together in harmony to make your body function. And this triggers your involuntary nervous system because you are not in control of your responses. This is where sending chills up your spine comes from. Your fight or flight reflex. People have a tendency of responding differently to those kinds of threats, to those kinds of triggers, let's call them. So sounds that are closer to you and get inside of your comfort zone might have a sense of triggering that fight or flight response. But because you're sitting at your computer in a quiet room and you're comfortable with your surroundings in all senses of the word, that closeness that can happen from someone whispering in your ear, might send chills up your spine in a way that you appreciate. I don't want to get too caught up on ASMR. That's a little bit about why it works though. But the same kind of triggers will happen at night to you as well. That's where your whole sense of survival and the whole, this feels off. Something's not right about walking down the road right there. There's something watching me. All that comes from a heightened sense of awareness of your surroundings and the uncommon sounds or common sounds that you are hearing in an uncommon way that just simply have a tendency of making you feel, it's unnerving, isn't it? When you hear even sounds that you're familiar with, your own breathing in a quiet room feels and sounds very loud. Orfield Labs in Minneapolis, Minnesota has what's known as an anechoic chamber. Now, you might know anechoic chambers to be a very, very quiet room with very, very thick walls, which are dense materials, soundproofing that room from the outside world. But there's also sound absorbing materials inside the room too, which means that any sound that is made is going to be absorbed and not bounced back. So basically, if you make a sound in this room, it's going to dissipate into the abyss and you're not going to hear it. Orfield Labs has what was known for a while to be the world's quietest room and measured at -9 dB. Now, if you're not familiar with decibels, then I'm going to ask you to watch my video on adding decibels because I talk about how every 3 dB and 6 dB, it means different things. And so I'm not going to get into the difference in sounds, but here's what I will tell you. Your house in a quiet environment, if your air conditioner or heater is not on, it might be around maybe -30 dB. In a recording studio, it might be -20 dB. And if you're talking about Orfield Labs Anechoic Chamber, it's -9 dB. Now, let me tell you a little bit about why you might want to know about Orfield Labs. Not just because they can test the noise performance of microphones or anything like that. No, you are allowed to go there. You can pay them to put you inside this room with either the lights on or the lights out, and it can make you very uneasy. It used to be that the people that would go inside there, it was a world record. You couldn't be in there for longer than about 45 minutes before you're going to go kind of crazy and get nervous. Why? Because if the noise level of the room is here and the sounds around the world are this loud, and suddenly you drop the noise performance to way here, the noise level to way down low, and you remove all those sounds and you're hearing the sounds that are just being made by your body. For example, your heart pumping, blood going through your veins, fluid going by your ears. You hear your own vitals. It is that low noise performance in that environment. And because of that, people can go crazy. They're listening to their own vitals. It's going to remind them of their sense of mortality. They're hearing, again, what are very not familiar sounds. They're uncomfortable, uncommon sounds, even though they are very natural. They're going to perhaps make you go crazy. So the world record as of the time of this video is 2 hours with either the lights on or off in the Orfield Labs Anechoic Chamber. Now, if you're wondering, they even warn on their website of something called temporary threshold shift, or TTS. Now, what that means is that if you're used to very loud, the world around you is very, very loud. Like, for example, you work in a warehouse or you work downtown and it's very loud, and then you go into their anechoic chamber, your sensitivity threshold is going to have to drop. You're going to hear ringing naturally in your ears, and you're probably not going to experience the quietness of that room nearly as effectively as you would if you get yourself used to quiet environments and then go in there. The ringing that you naturally hear in your ears when you get into a quiet environment, just from your ears strained as you just go through your daily life, that ringing in your ears is going to be deafening in a room that's that quiet. And when you are hearing the vitals and you're hearing your blood pumping through your veins, that could drive you crazy because all of a sudden the world is very loud around you and it seems very unnatural. Now, granted, I haven't done this. This is just me going off of what I've heard and the reports I've picked up online. But there is a lot of science involved, and I'll get into science here in a second. Now, but first, if you're wondering, by the way, where the quietest room in the world is, as of the time of this video, it is the Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington, and they have an anechoic chamber there that's been measured at negative 20.35 dBA. You cannot go there unless you're an employee of Microsoft working there. Now, it has been estimated that the sound of air molecules bouncing around in the air could be heard in an environment of negative 24 dB or below. So that's about half as loud as it would be in this Microsoft anechoic chamber. We'll see in time if we are able to ever hear those. Again, that is estimated, but that gives you an idea of how low volume that really is in that environment. So you can imagine how creepy it could be. I mentioned that we would talk a little bit about the science. One of the reasons why, and the big reason why sound travels so well at night, is because of something called temperature inversion. You know about the greenhouse effect, where the sun itself is a heat source, but it doesn't heat up the air. What it heats up is anything that those waves of light hit. So if you're in a completely enclosed glass room, the light from the sun goes in, hits all the surfaces underneath, gets those surfaces hot, it converts to heat. That heat gets trapped inside the greenhouse and creates the greenhouse effect. You're familiar with this, right? Okay, let's take this to the next level. The world around you does the same thing. It doesn't matter how cold or how hot it is. During the day, the sun is going to hit your skin, it's going to hit your coat, and it's going to make you feel warmer even in a cold environment. And it's doing the same thing to the ground. So it warms up the ground around you, even in sub-freezing temperatures. The ground is going to be hotter during the day when the sun is on it. That means that the hot air is going to rise off of those hot surfaces, and it's going to push cold air upwards, which is why fog on the ground, you'll see it over a field or something early in the morning, but as the sun starts to warm up the ground, the fog will raise and you will see clearly across the ground once again. Fog lifts as the heat travels and pushes that fog upwards. So cooler air is above the hotter air during the day. Now you may say that doesn't make any sense. Hot air rises, cool air falls. Well, the hot air is rising, but it's being pushed up by more hot air and more, which pushes the cold air up. And your sound, or sound in general, that spreads out in every direction as it dissipates and travels. As you speak, your sound is going to be pushed upwards and away from anything that would want to be hearing it on the ground. However, during night, it's different. When the earth is no longer being heated, it cools. So the hot air at that point, as soon as it's no longer being heated, that hot air will rise, the cool air will fall, and at that point, the cool air is on the bottom, and the hot air, which is a little pocket of air over the cold air, is suddenly, as you speak, your sound is going to again go in all directions and dissipate over distance, but as your voice is traveling outwards, it's going to catch some of that hot air and suddenly be rocketed off in a distance, and it's going to be spreading out in all different directions as it travels, and then eventually it will drop back down to earth at a farther distance away. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, radio waves work the same way, which is why at night you can hear a radio station sometimes hundreds of miles away, but during the day you can't. It's going to be bouncing off of that little pocket of warm air. It can also be affected by solar flares, the aurora borealis. There's other things about that too, and how RF actually works, but it's going to be bouncing off of the ionosphere and coming back down to earth. And line of sight is no longer an issue at night like it is during the day. Radio tower over here on earth, they can communicate, or a receiver can communicate to a radio tower, pick that up from a transmission as long as it's line of sight. As soon as you start to get earth in the way, it's going to start to maybe be a little bit more of an issue for you to pick up that signal. But at night, it's going to travel upwards and bounce it back down, meaning that you can be farther around the side of the earth and still pick up that radio signal. Sound does the exact same thing. Now, as you've heard me talk in the past, it takes more power for lower frequencies to travel a farther distance. And that's simply because lower frequencies, the lower something is, the more omnidirectional it is. Below 50 hertz is pretty much fully omnidirectional. Your voice, normally a male voice will start at about 80 hertz, so it's not going to be a full omnidirectional, but the sound is still going to dissipate in all directions around them, and it's going to be a little bit more front-focused. But either way, the mids are going to be more focused in front of them, and the highs are going to be very narrow in a straight line. That's the general sense of it. So the same amount of power for the omnidirectional lower frequencies, or the ones that spread out in all directions, that power is going to be spread in all directions, as opposed to that power being channeled into a smaller area and going a farther distance, or even the highs, which are going to be even more narrow and travel an even greater distance. That's just the nature of sound waves. Now, if we are talking about sound from that perspective, and then sound is carried, like for example, the lower frequencies are going to be carried a greater distance. They're going to sound quite a bit louder in that environment with a higher signal to noise ratio, thanks to temperature inversion carrying sounds a farther distance, and because of your heightened awareness to sounds at night, that combination allows you to hear and very much dial in on the closeness of distant sounds. Even if it is a deeper sound, like someone walking through leaves, you're going to hear the lower sounds. And it's not the same as it is during the day. And because you can't necessarily see what is back there in the woods, it's going to sound louder. It's going to sound closer for that reason. Again, that's a recipe for fear. You may say, what about blind people? People who can't see at all? Do they have the same fear at night? Well, they do, but again, just like you, they have a heightened sensitivity to sounds in general, but then they're going to be hearing them better at night too. But because they can't see, now I understand that some people do have sensitivity to light, but if you can't see at all and it is completely dark, presumably, I mean, they don't have any concept of lightness or darkness if they're completely blind from birth, but if you have no concept of light at all, and let's just say for our purposes, it's completely black, it's completely dark. At night, you're going to be able to hear better, just like a human that has sight can. And so because of their heightened sensitivity towards sound, they're going to be able to pick it up even better. But if you listen to and watch videos by like Tommy Edison and people on YouTube, for example, they're going to tell you that they have fears during the day, because they cannot see during the day. For example, people that don't have the ability to see fear electricity. You don't want to accidentally touch a plug the wrong way and get electrically shocked. You don't want to accidentally be hit by a car. Or if you're between two trains, you're at a train station, it's too loud. Walking off the train, into the train rails. People who don't have the ability to see have that as a real fear. They also have the fear of things like spilling something and not cleaning all of it up, because 3 days later, when it's really sticky and suddenly they put their hand down there, they freak out. They could get very, very, freaked by the fact that there's wetness down there and they don't remember where it came from, but they missed it when they were cleaning up. That is a fear to people that don't have sight, and you can see these online. Not just the fear of bugs that people normally have, if you do have eyesight, there's other fears in there too. So hopefully this has given you some insight as to what makes people fear night more, and especially when it comes down to sound. Why is sound so scary at night? Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sound Speeds. Be sure to tune in the future for more timestamp. Video starts at this timestamp, sound information, and sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.